Okay, all right. Now we're here at the Sankofa, and we want to remember that this is all about Josiah celebrates Passover. And see, what we find is that the Jewish Passover inspired celebrations in other countries and cultures. An example of this is Ghana's God People's Homowo Festival, which is Ghana's largest festival. And so, what we read here is the Jewish Passover apparently has inspired similar celebrations in various countries and cultures. And so, in this African country of Ghana, in the greater Accra region, is a people group called the God people, and they have a celebration that is the Homowo festival, or otherwise the harvest custom, which folklore says the Jewish Passover festival inspired this event. This annual celebration starts at the end of April and runs into May, and subsidiary reports say that variations of the Homowo can run for months. The story behind the Homowo is very, very interesting. The Passover marks the start of the Jewish liberation from Egyptian slavery and oppression. Likewise, Homowo marks liberation from a grueling famine and all the horrors of a large scale national drought. So, as the God people tell the story, it all started when the seasonal rains did not come, right? These rains were vital for the growth and maturity of the food crops. So, because the rains failed, the crops failed, and the people had no food. The famine that followed was brutal with all the associated horrors. So, when normal rainfall patterns returned, crops grew rapidly and food was abundant. So, people celebrated. These celebrations quickly became an annual national festival. The significance of the festival is in the name Homowo, which in the God people language means to hoot or cheer, right? Jeer, I should say, at hunger. So when food became available, the people laughed at hunger, right? So understanding the significance of a festival is the best way to prepare for its celebration. Amen. God bless. Okay, so now we move on to the case study. Again, keeping in mind the title, Josiah Celebrates Passover. So when we talk about the Passover celebration, there's some things we can keep in mind. The historical horror and jubilation. And when we think about still or now, what do they what is the sense of things now? Relief, joy, and hope. We can think about the general attitude that the people cherish the tradition, and they have a sense of reverence and joy. Um, Other communities, they sympathize and they accommodate the celebration of the Passover or the Passover celebration. Another point is to understanding and accommodation, respect, and love extends beyond the Jews. And these are things to keep in mind. The case study reads as such: the Passover celebration is a feature of Jewish communities. Yet, in all countries where Jews live, people outside those communities, they hear about, and in several ways, they accommodate this major Jewish religious festival. The Jews take this cherished part of their history and tradition with them wherever they go, and they are not ashamed of it. So, historically, and from the Bible narrative, the original Passover marked a time of both horror and jubilation. The horror reminded Jews of their bitter slavery in Egypt before the first Passover. Hebrew lives were lost. They had to make bricks without straw and watch their family life crumble. Their captors tried to strip them of their customs, religion, and sense of hope. The enslavement in Egypt was a chilling type of horror, one they would gladly forget. Yet, the Passover celebration still releases a sense of relief, joy, and hope for the Jews. It speaks of God's enduring love towards them. Passover reminded Israel that God will rescue and preserve them in any situation, however daunting. Yep, whatever else it is, Passover is a yearly reminder of God's heart of love for the Jews. So we should remember that based on our limited research, the general attitude of the Jews towards Passover celebration is one of cherished tradition, reverence, and joy. And this is our main point of focus. The Jews must know a secret on how to turn national tragedies into bright silver linings of celebrate, right? Um, um, they, they turn basically tragedy into triumph. You know, this bright silver linings that they can find in this horrific um, historical moments in their history, right? Their history, they can celebrate. And in general, the world sympathizes with and accommodates Jews in their memorials and celebrations. Now, when the Jews remember the horrors of their past, they get the understanding they rightly deserve. Other communities do not ask Jews to get over their atrocities and move on. No, they don't do that. There is no widespread public pushback on the facts of the atrocities. There is sympathy and accommodation. Sympathy and accommodation. This observation prompts us to ask, why is similar sympathy and accommodation not offered to other communities that have suffered equally dehumanizing atrocities? Why? That's a good question. We must question, for instance, why we see such vicious pushbacks against the facts of African Americans. You got to ask that question. The African slavery. Why do we get pushback on that? Right? Why are descendants of the African slave trade victims urged to forget their horrible past and move on to brighter days? Where is the sympathy and accommodation like that widely offered to the Jews? Nothing in these questions suggests that the Jews have no right to the sympathies and accommodation they get for events like Passover. They deserve that human understanding. But understanding, accommodation, respect, and love must extend beyond them. It is equally due to people whose history contains similar and more horrible events of slavery and freedom. Amen. Amen. God bless.